Hello, and welcome to Building at Scale North America on the Data Center Construction channel. My name's Emma Brooks. I am the channel manager for the Construction, Energy and Sustainability and Investments and Markets channels here at DCD, and I'm delighted to be moderating this episode on the changing role of prefabrication in meeting demand for growth. So, really important topic, and thank you very much to Legence for supporting this episode. So with me here today, I have four speakers. So I have Steve Hansen, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Legence, Arif Qureshi, who is the Chief Growth Officer at Legence, Steve Conn, who is the Director of Pre-Construction at Therma, and Steve Torr, who is the Principal and Partner at CMTA Inc. So thank you very much to you all for joining me. So to get us kind of straight into the conversation, I want to look at what has changed in the data center market over the past year. How is this affecting prefabrication? So Steve C., if I can jump to you first, if that's okay. Obviously, one thing everyone in the market is talking about at the moment is this kind of explosion of AI and high density workloads. How has the prefabrication market adapted to this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And truthfully, just to kind of set the stage and set the tone, prefabrication and fabrication in general is not necessarily a new concept, but with the advent of data center hyperscalers, and especially in the AI environment, we've really come to a different part or place of the marketplace of thinking of prefab more of a manufacturing environment. Our traditional mode of execution, there's an incredible amount of craftspeople that are involved in bringing the prefabrication to market. But in this manufacturing type environment, we're looking more of the manufacturing side that would truthfully get us more into overall development on the supply chain side and focusing more on procurement. We bring in things that are part of our business, but focusing more heavily on procurement, QA/QC, and supply chain. That is really not new to the marketplace, but a different form of approach for us as contractors.
Well, and I would add that with the speed that these data centers are going to market, in order to make and meet their schedules, we have to get out in front of them on the fabrication side. And if we built these buildings in traditional boots on the ground 100%, we would never make their schedules or meet their demands.
And I think speed to market, right, Steve, is a major issue for a lot of our customers. As you know, Legence has a little over 70 data center customers that we provide services for, and construction and design. So one of the challenges they have, right, is the limited amount of power. So the first in the market, the first to be able to get that power becomes really, really critical. So what you're seeing now in this market is the change in tactics. I think, Steve Kahn's right. We always did fabrication, but the amount of fabrication that's being done and getting it on site as soon as possible so that these data centers can be up and running is extremely critical, because that's how they're able to revenue, right? So I think that's the changing environment we're operating in now, is limited power, first to market, critical. So what can we do as a design and construction firm to really expedite installation of these data centers across North America?
Yeah, absolutely. That's sorry, go on.
Sorry, Emma. Yeah, real quick, just kind of the arms race, if you will, for hyperscaling and AI, especially, that we're seeing. Just echoing what the other guys have already said, getting to market, prefabrication has always been a benefit for accelerating the construction cycle, but we're operating now at a speed and scale that the entire process is taking on an entirely different dynamic. So it's those of us that have been doing it for a long, long time and are tooled up in that regard. It's a definite benefit. Legence having multiple locations that have the ability to do that. But as we take on this new manufacturing kind of approach, specifically on the procurement and supply chain side, combining that with the craft elements of expertise, it's a game changer.
Well, it's the pressure has changed too, right? The financial entities backing these things are different than they used to be. We relate these constantly like casinos, right? Every day they're not open, they're losing millions of dollars. And so the pressure to deliver those has gotten farther, and it falls all the way down the chain to deliver these projects.
Great point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, time is money, right? And that kind of speed to market that you mentioned, obviously, this is like crucial as well in terms of the construction process, the power procurement. Have you noticed an increase in customer demand when it comes to prefabricated resources and support as well?
I mean, of course,
Yeah.
it's every one of our clients has run into a major lead time issue, and it's not just data centers. Data centers are competing with every other market that's out there as well, and so that's compounding. It's coming back to them. I mean, it's the way that they're attracting this right now is sort of the old Ricky Bobby speech of if you ain't first, you're last, right? And they're looking at this trying to get first in line to every piece of material they can get on that site now, whether it's big box prefab or small part prefab.
And in terms of that data center capacity, I mean, Steve H, you mentioned sort of the huge growth in megawatts that we're seeing of what used to be a big data center and what is a big data center now. What are the trends that you're seeing in terms of just sort of this sort of huge expansion? Steve H, maybe I could come to you on that one.
No, again, a great question. And if you kind of look at the history of data centers, right, early 2000s when data centers were removed from let's call it an on-prem data closet or data center within a facility to co-location facilities or cloud facilities or anything like that, an 8 to 16 megawatt data center was a very large data center at that time. And we've seen it progress over the last couple of decades. A year ago, a 32 or 48 megawatt data center was considered a large data center. And today we're seeing these hyperscalers and owners push to 300 and 500 megawatt data centers, right? And so just the sheer size of the facility, the amount of headcount, boots on the ground that you need to facilitate and build something like that. And we kind of, Steve hit it earlier, right? That arms race and who can get the power required first and then get the land and then get something built to get a tenant into it. And prefabrication is going to be a big part of that, right? Staying in front of the supply chain, staying in front of the schedule, and not running into a resource problem, right? We have a labor resource problem in this country. As construction markets boom, we don't have as many people on the ground that can build it. So if we can get out in front of it and be more efficient and get things there just in time and meet schedules, then it benefits our end users and ultimately the end customer.
Yeah, you mentioned the labor challenge there. I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of the challenges that we're seeing in the data center market. So obviously one thing that's become very prominent over the past couple of years is that the data center industry is facing a massive workforce shortage. How can prefab support with this? How can reduce need for high levels of expertise on site help data centers to perhaps move to different locations or different regions where they maybe haven't been able to operate before. Obviously, this is a trend we're seeing with regards to limitations of power in regions like Northern Virginia. Steve C, maybe I can pick on you for this one.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, traditionally, the construction market has always been somewhat geocentric, right? Where we operate in areas within regions that we reside in. We may have a jurisdictional limit or a boundary that we kind of maybe stretch to, but traditionally it's been geographically based. And to the point of the data center market, especially the hyperscaling market, their big push and their big need is a reliable grid and reliable fiber. So they're putting their facilities anywhere they can obtain that reliable infrastructure. And oftentimes it's outside of geo boundaries of local installing contractors or contractors of scale or size. Traditionally, large scale contractors like ourselves, we do have hubs in large urban areas. But these data centers, and especially the hyperscalers, are finding locations that far outstretch the boundary lines of most of the scaling contractors. But prefab brings an entirely different capability to a local installing contractor, especially one maybe that isn't operating at scale. So if they've got resources and infrastructure to build, but maybe not facilities to fabricate. For the example of large carbon hydronic piping, where our facility may have the ability to do large bore carbon up to 60-inch diameter, these local contractors don't even have the ability to fabricate at all. So prefab is bringing that resource availability to jurisdictional areas that wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do it, and in turn is giving local contractors the ability to participate and generate revenue where they wouldn't otherwise be able to. So it's truthfully it's helping local labor workforces and contracting entities that wouldn't necessarily participate in that vertical market. And it also enables the speed to market, right, for the client, where we're actually able to support them in areas where they traditionally wouldn't have the support from an installing contractor.
And I think just to follow up on that, Steve, is that, and I think Emma, you mentioned this too, right? Northern Virginia is still a very, very large market. There's still a lot of activity going on, but there's challenges there. So I think we're seeing some shift in the geo plays that these data centers have, especially hyperscalers, but even the colo people are looking at different areas. And it's interesting. It's for different reasons, right? You think it's only for one reasons where they're going. So when you start looking at, you go outside North Virginia, look at Dallas-Fort Worth. It's a major growth area. And what's happening there is the transmission infrastructure upgrades are happening there right now. And that allows them to go after that market and expand in that market. We see that in Atlanta. Atlanta is a low-cost power provider, and they have a lot of space and land. So we're seeing a lot of movement into those areas too, which is a good thing, right? Because you have those contractors there. Our ability to be able to support them with high-end prefabrication or fabrication really helps them to be able to go after these large, complex projects. Chicago is another area, right? Chicago, especially with hyperscalers, because you have great connectivity there, there's going to be continued development in that market. Austin and especially San Antonio, whole different play there, because we are starting to see local government incentives that want to bring in those type of construction jobs into their markets. And finally, Salt Lake City, right? Salt Lake City has great fiber infrastructure. Electricity rates are low. Land can be pretty easy to acquire. So there's different reasons why we're seeing movement in that area. And like Steve mentioned, right, one of the biggest issues is having contractors' ability to provide those complex solutions. And I think fabrication helps that. And corporations like ours, like Legence and others who have that massive fabrication capability to be able to take that into any part of the U.S. allows those other contractors to provide the labor to install it. So I think we're really starting to expand the ability for contractors to provide these complex projects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'll only kind of see more and more of that with sort of the increased expansion in all those sorts of traditionally tier two markets, which you could argue that they're not even tier two markets because they're seen so much growth, but everything that's seeing there. I mean, one thing that was mentioned with this sort of speed to market element is sort of this standardized reference design that data centers are using. I mean, how does this enable them to lift and shift their product? Again, a Reef or Steve H. I don't know if either of you have any views on that.
Yeah, and Steve Torrey will probably have a view on this as well. But what we're starting to see is a desire from the data center clients to recreate their design so that they can lift and shift and pick up and move to any geography. And where prefab plays in is if we are prefabbing, whether it's 12 megawatt chiller yard sections and storing, then if they want to pick up from one geography to another, if they run into a power or a permit issue or a customer issue, we can just shift that resource from one part of the country to another, right? Trucking is cheap these days. So if we can assist and utilize our 5 different locations across the country for fabrication and stay in front of their needs, they can quickly, if they've got to go from New Albany, Ohio to Atlanta, we can just pick up and ship to another location. So we're starting to see that trend. It's easier said than done to create a mirrored image, no matter what geography you go into.
Yeah, I'm going to look at it in 2 different ways a little bit, right? I mean, you have those situations where we're building brand new data centers, right? That's one whole market you got to go attack. But I think the other thing we're seeing a lot of demand for is there's a lot of existing data centers and the refurbishment of those data centers, right? As technology changes, efficiency improves, different products and solutions come to the table, you also have to look at that piece as you go forward. For that piece, I think standardized design doesn't work because you have existing systems, existing processes that have to be modified and designed from scratch, right? But that has to happen because that's one way to be able to continue to improve the amount of capacity, because capacity is a big issue. Even with the massive increase in construction of these data centers, we still have an issue that the amount of space is actually declining. We need more and more space. Now, in terms of brand new ones, you're absolutely right? When you start putting together more standard designs, it's faster to the market, but there's another piece of it. It makes it easier for contractors to install it, right? Because it's kind of a plug and play approach to be able to say, okay, we've done this multiple times. We can recreate this in a different market or in a different geo. So I think it's a big advantage of being able to standardize those. But it's typically on those new construction. I think refurbishing is a whole different ball game. We haven't really dug into that, and I know Steve Hansen and others can talk about it. We're seeing that the refurbishment cycle is getting, tighter and smaller, where customers are demanding that these type of existing facility needs to be improved on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and I think for the refurb market, what we're going to see is it's twofold. We've got an aging data center population out there from when early 2000s, everybody started building these things. And changing technologies, right down to the servers that they're putting in there and the capacity within a smaller server bank that we can fit into less square footage and get more power out of that data center. So technologies are changing. The way we're cooling these servers are changing. It's like the computer. You buy it and 6 months later it's outdated, right? And so we have to stay in front of that as well while we're working with our customers and stay on the cutting edge of design to make sure we're giving them the best design that we can as well.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. Another thing that has been touched on as a challenge in the construction industry is obviously the supply chain hasn't quite gone back to where it was pre-COVID. Obviously, data center operators are competing for key materials, like even ones such as stainless steel. How can prefab support with this? Steve T, maybe I can turn it to you for this one.
Well, yeah, and I think, right now, what we dealt with during COVID was a global shortage of 1 million parts, pieces, and everything in between. We're still faced with major challenges on the infrastructure we need for these. So the lead times on gen sets and switchgear are as long as they've ever been. I do think the raw materials we're starting to keep up with, and then separate from that is just general labor resource. And so when we talk about prefab, I think this still just goes back to speed of delivery. The first person to get in line and obtain those materials is going to be the first person that can deliver those projects. And so I think that as long as we can sort of keep ahead of those cycles, prefab will continue to advance us in just speed of delivery.
And I would add, right, along with the labor and on the materials side, as technology changes and we're seeing more liquid cooled systems that with a need for stainless steel pipe, everybody's competing for the same stainless steel pipe. All these hyperscalers and data center builders are all competing for the same materials across the country. So if we are out in front and prefabbing and staying in front of the supply chain instead of doing just-in-time fabrication and delivery, and we're stockpiling, for lack of a better term, it gives us a clearer path to stay in front of any shortages that we might see or lead time issues that we might have with materials or gensets or any type of equipment. And we're seeing that, right? Data center providers have always been out in front of ordering all their gensets and equipment and everything, and a year out as they look at building data centers. It's kind of the new thing to say, well, how do I stay a year ahead of my fabrication needs, right? Versus a bid the job, build a schedule, go build the project. So it's one of the changing aspects of the landscape we're seeing right now.
I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things we're also saying, there'll always be challenge on the supply side, right? Because the demand is so massive out there. So there's always going to be issues. I think what's changed also, and I'm curious what you guys also think about this, is I think that the customers are getting to be a lot more savvy, and they're planning these way in advance so that they know that all this has to be in order, and you got to have the supply, you got to have the design done, you have to have the fabrication done in advance. So I think they're actually getting very good at the planning aspect of it. And I can use an example of, we recently met with one of our data center clients, and we talked about the backlog they had, right? We had with them, and we said, hey, we have this backlog. And his immediate response was, okay, that's great. Can you handle 5 times as much more backlog? And can we start planning now for it, even though it may come online 2-3 years down the road? So they're actually thinking way further ahead, because I think the other thing that's changing, and I think some of you brought it up, is how these projects are being funded. This is a brand new asset class, and it is very, very The revenue is there, the demand is there. So the money is coming into that. So they can start planning for these way in advance. And I think that is really going to help in terms of ensuring that we on the construction side, on the contractor side, on the prefab side, also start planning for those materials so that we don't have those supply shortages. And I think you guys are seeing that too with some of your customers, right?
Yeah, and part of that, the evolution that the hyperscalers and data center developers have gone through, they've had philosophies for many years on doing early buys of primary equipment, for example. They do bulk buys and early procurement for large mechanical equipment, switchgear, data center generators. There's always been a philosophy of being first in line in that regard, and a lot of that philosophical approach is being applied for good reason to the kit of parts that now can be provided as part of the prefabrication process. So that entire philosophy, they're using it to inform schedule, using it to inform not just speed to market, but being able to conquer territory, if you will, and get into areas and jurisdictions that have the fiber and have the power, and build first. And if they have not just the chillers and switchgear and gensets available to them that they've been pre-buying and pre-ordering for 18, 24, 36 months, but they've complemented that now with the actual infrastructure on the prefabrication side, it brings a full complement of building materials that allows them to actually get to speed to market faster.
Well said. You've teed me up quite nicely. I want to move us forward to talk around some of the benefits of prefab and how it can help to address some of these challenges specifically. Arif, if I could maybe come to you first. I mean, what impact does prefab have on project timelines, overall efficiency and repeatability? And how does this repeatability enable employees to kind of hone their skills for less risk of errors, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the biggest advantage of prefab, right, is the fact that you have a controlled environment you can operate in, right? And you have a lot of technology right there, and you're able to use that to be able to fabricate all of these things. So the efficiency is extremely high. You're able to do that. And I'm going to let some of these guys who are doing this every day talk a lot more about this. But the other piece of this that's also important is I think that the fact that in terms of limited labor that you have today, and the fact that you limit labor, especially in the field, the more fabrication you can get done inside these fabrication shops, it is going to have a massive impact in terms of getting the project done on time and at the right cost, right? It's extremely important. I mean, the three things that all of our customers are looking for, right, is the right price, high quality, and the tight timelines that they have to meet. And the only way you're going to be able to get that done is through that prefabrication process. And the other piece of this is it is repeatable, right? Once you do that, you've set up your plans to be able to produce those. You can produce them a lot more efficiently. So those are some of the things I think that are extremely valuable as you move forward. And I know Steve Hansen deals with this every single day, so I'm going to pass him on to him to provide some more detail around this.
Yeah, I think if you look at schedules, right, what we used to build in 18 to 24 months, everybody wants to build in 10 to 14 months, right? So, and it really goes down to, and Arif hit it, the revenue that is created at these data centers, they need to be online in order to generate the revenue. So by fabricating in-house, right, we're way more efficient. It's less boots on the ground. And I think the big key here is if we can standardize it and, for, lack of a better term, turn them into Lincoln log sets that we can just drop on site and you can just start building. We're taking out all the front end design, all the front end planning, all that, right? Not all of it. Obviously, we still have to design and plan. But if we're doing a repeatable system, it shortens that time immensely. So,
yeah, I think Steve, the other thing I was just going to bring up was also about safety and what impact have we seen on that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As we go through the scaling of the data center market, right, we see that they're literally adding zeros behind their capacities, going from megawatt facilities to gigawatt facilities in some hyperscaling cases. We're expanding facilities as well, right? So our operations are growing, our operations are expanding, we're adding facilities. And as we go through that and we're tooling up with the facilities that we already have online, we're bringing on some innovation and methods of work and process in manufacturing that are not just increasing speed, efficiency, and quality, but safety. Safety is a huge part of our business. It's a huge part of our industry. Making sure our craftspeople get home, healthy every night is priority number one. And along with those new technologies and expanded facilities, you have efficiency pickups that are direct results of new technology with automation and robotics, keeping people in safe positions. You're talking about welding and moving around large bore carbon piping. I mean, these are big, heavy elements that we're prefabricating, and these facility improvements and expansions that are being made across the industry, and specifically with Legence. It's a massive increase in safety, keeping people in safe positions, and making sure our craft labor force is maximizing their work output, but doing it in a really, really safe environment and highly efficient.
Definitely. Arif, were you going to add something on there to what Steve H said?
No, I was just going to emphasize, right, what you're seeing now is that this type of prefabrication actually is going to get even more efficient as we go further, right? There's new technologies coming in. There's new approaches to be able to fabricate more things, right, off-site. I think that's the piece that we're going to see a big difference on. The other piece I think we'll talk about maybe later is, one of the challenges, and we can cover that later around, is energy is a big challenge, right? The fact of the matter is these are massive, massive energy hogs. And when you start looking at some of the changes that are happening, especially, I think we're going to see this very, very soon, this whole concept of text to video that's going on, which is, I think it's like the open AIs. I think Sora is out there. That could require 10,000 times the computing power of a Google search, right? So when you start seeing some of those things, we also have to adapt, and technology has to change, and our ability to provide maybe on-site energy resources becomes bigger and bigger. And I think we're going to see a massive change coming up in the next few years in terms of how these systems are designed because of the lack of power that's out there.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll definitely get onto that. I want to move us forward slightly, just in the interest of time, for what's next for prefabrication. How is Legence responding? What's kind of the North Star goal there? Steve T, I'll turn to you first, if that's okay. When it comes to, we've talked a lot around the benefits of prefab. When it comes to the way that the ROI in prefab is calculated, have you seen any major changes? Is this still very much focused on efficiency and process?
Yeah, no, I love this question because I think so. There's two things that are going on here. One, again, is speed to market. Like we said, they're losing millions of dollars every day of an operating. That immediately goes to the RA, right? Speed of delivery comes immediately back in cash flow. Part of this, though, when I look at ROI and how prefab really plays into this, you kind of look back at like the three principles of like circular economics, right? Reuse, recycle, repurpose, right? And in some way, we are installing these systems. They can be broken down just the same way they were put back in, right? And repurposed and reused. I think that goes maybe a little bit to the core philosophy of sustainability, but that immediately translates back into ROI, right? So when these facilities are going, and these facilities run very hard, as they translate and they phase out, replacing equipment in those can be a little bit faster, can be a little bit cheaper. Everything that's faster is cheaper. And in general, you're just extending the overall life cycle of the facility for something, especially that's running that hard.
Brilliant, thank you. One thing that was touched on as well is kind of how big data and automation are becoming a big part of Legence's prefabrication strategy. Steve C, can I turn it to you to explain a little bit more in detail of that to our audience?
Yeah, maybe not so ironically, we're all being consumed in some ways by big data, and the facilities that we're building that are supporting all the AI infrastructure and hyperscaling data center environments. There's a tremendous amount of big data sourcing and tracking and measurement and audit that we're actually implementing as part of our process. And like I said, it's not terribly ironic, but it's happening at the construction and prefab levels of the industry as well. So, so much of what our clients demand has a lot to do with quality assurance and quality control. I mean, their tolerance for failure is effectively zero. So that means that every craft element that touches a given piece of prefabricated material has to be auditable. So you can imagine there's hundreds of thousands worth of hours and welds and components and pieces and parts, piping and fittings. The amount of labor that would go into tracking and cataloging that level of data, it's off the chart. So we're actually implementing large big data sourcing tools into our process, which frankly for construction is relatively new, and it's really proven to be not just a game changer on prefab, but also the way we approach construction in general. And so much of that process is being integrated, not just with the craft labor, but also with quality assurance and quality control, all the way to and expanding through our engineering and detailing elements and efforts. So it's a different approach than probably the traditional construction market has seen over the last couple of decades, but it's driving process and it's driving efficiency. And for our clients, it actually seamlessly integrates with their understanding of how they go to market. So it's a pretty unique symbiotic relationship with how we've kind of started using big data and how it's integrating and informing our fabrication process, all the way to how we're implementing robotics and automation, levels of QR coding for auditing and cataloging labor data that we can then translate over to our QA/QC elements. It's also a searchable database for the client, which is really important for them. So yeah, it's a very, like I said, symbiotic relationship that the construction market probably hasn't really known or seen, even in our data center experience in the recent past.
Yeah, interesting. One thing that I wanted to circle back onto too, something that you said, Arif, you talked around how the energy trends that we're seeing in the data center market, and what impact this is having on prefabrication, and how this can potentially support. Are you able to expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that, right? I mean, as we all know this, one of the biggest challenges data centers are they use up a lot of energy, right? And we got to figure out a way to be able to supply that energy for them on an ongoing basis. And of course, you also have to have backup power and all those kind of components that are critical to ensuring operation, right? These are 24/7 operating facilities. They can't go down. If they go down, we got a major problem, right? So I think there's two components. One is, how do we make sure there's enough resiliency, right, in the grid? How do we make sure we have enough resiliency in terms of power supply so that these systems don't run into issues going forward? The second piece of this is you have the power. And I think for the first time, we're starting to see whether it's renewable resources on site or the fact that you create some microgrids in those areas, or the other piece that there's a lot of discussion around, and I'm kind of, I don't want to be at the bleeding edge, I want to be on the cutting edge, but the fact of the matter is that because of this power issue, I mean, there are options and opportunities that a lot of research is going on is around nuclear, right? How can we use nuclear to be able to provide energy? And again, bringing on a nuclear power plant, extremely tough, very expensive to do. But we're for the first time seeing some self-contained units that can be brought in on site to be able to provide that supply. The other thing is battery storage, right? Battery storage is going to become a big component of this. Because when you look at, even if your power sources or energy sources are coming from renewable, whether it's wind or solar, that you still need to be able to store that and to be able to provide that. So I think there's going to be a transition. We're going to see energy transition, especially around these data centers. We're just starting to see some discussion around how to do this, but I think there's a few things, right? You'll see renewables, you're going to see nuclear as a potential option, you're going to see microgrids, and you're going to see a lot of backup power to be able to move this thing forward. So I think that's a continuous change in the market that that has to happen. There's no other way around it. And part of it is, even with the massive amount of data center construction that's going on, we still have not enough capacity, right? And the capacity continues to grow and outstrip basically the supply of these data centers. So I don't know if others have some ideas around, what do we do with this massive challenge around energy as we go forward?
Yeah, I think you hit all the salient points on it, and it's going to be a continued changing landscape, right? And it's going to get driven by the data center providers. Excuse me, they're going to start looking away from the local providers of power and have to figure out how to do some of this for themselves as we move forward.
I think some of that too, to your point, Arif, there is some of these emerging technologies on the nuclear side and microgrid, for example, that kind of have some of that, NIMBY type characteristics, which really starts driving even more of what we've seen in the recent past here of pushing data centers into more and more remote areas. Now, the land and the infrastructure is there, but it becomes a challenge for construction, right? So hence the whole prefab discussion, where we really are bringing a large amount of value to the project, but also enabling construction and enabling those sites that would probably be, kind of off their consideration list from a geo perspective, unless they had the ability to source prefab the way that we can provide it.
Definitely. Another trend that we're seeing with regards to high density, for example, is this increased need for liquid cooling, sort of the changes in design there. How is Legence adapting to those changing requirements? Steve H., if I could maybe turn to you for that one.
Yeah, it's a new and emerging technology that we're going to see more and more data center providers move to. And we've got some clients that are on the front end of it, and we've been working with them through design and implementation of some new systems. Much of it's under NDA, so I can't go too deep into it. But we have been working with them and their designers, not just on the design and how the system is going to work, but means and methods of how we implement it and install it in the field. And there'll be a giant prefabrication side of this, and we hit it on earlier. It is bringing new materials into the data centers, right? We traditionally large bore carbon steel was the material of choice, and now we're switching to stainless steel pipe. And so, if you go through the history of data centers, used to just be moving a bunch of air in hot aisles and cold aisles, and no water in the data centers, from fire suppression to anything else. It was FM200 systems, and you didn't put water in data centers. And now we're seeing direct to the drive cooling. And so we have to change along with our customer and stay ahead of that, right? So we're going down the rabbit hole with them and helping design and work through these processes. And I'm sure Steve Torrey's got some comments on this from the design side and the challenges that come along from there too. So,
yeah, I mean, I don't think strictly from a prefabrication standpoint, not much changes, to be honest, Emma. It's still delivery that is the proactive choice there. So I think what we're doing in those, we're familiar with these technologies, we're designing these technologies, a little bit of plug and play. The metrics change a little bit, but the reality is the delivery of the systems that we're designing are not substantially different from what we're currently doing. And the same prefabrication model is being utilized to deliver these high density data centers and direct to chip cooling systems that we were using on the old air side that Steve mentioned, right? So I think in that respect, we're right in line to continue to utilize prefabrication for that.
Yeah.
And I think these new technologies on the site, right? I would assume this is all goes back the full circle of why we're putting these in, right? Is the issue of lack of energy, and this will be a lot more efficient in terms of liquid cooling than the way we have been doing in the past. So it's interesting that not only are you having an impact in terms of, make sure I've got the energy supply in terms of managing the supply side of this, but I think the customers are now looking at it and going, okay, what do I need to do on the demand side, right? What can I do to really control the demand? How do I make my data centers a lot more efficient, a lot more sustainable? That's going to be another big play as we go forward, right? Because in the past, that was not top of mind for them, right? It was like, we got $1 billion, there's good revenue, let's keep making this happen. But now we're getting into a problem that, look, there's not just enough energy, enough electricity that can come into these data centers. So what can we do in our own facilities to be able to make them way more efficient as we move forward? And I keep bringing up the refurbishment issue because that's going to come into play again, right? These are the kind of technologies that we're going to have to install into these existing facilities to make them even more efficient than the way they're operating today. So we're seeing both an impact on the supply side, but we're also going to see a significant impact, I think, on the demand side. And you're perfectly positioned, right, if you have that massive fabrication capability to be able to do a lot of this work in a controlled environment and bring it on site and be a lot more efficient to get these projects online.
Well said. We have just a couple of minutes left, so I'll throw it out for maybe one or two of you to answer just for the last couple of minutes. So as Legence continues to invest in prefabrication, what innovations or expansions do you anticipate in the near future? So I'll leave that open for someone to jump in.
Yeah, I think we're seeing we are expanding our fabrication facilities in multiple geos to accommodate this uptick in work, and in doing so, we're going to more automated robotic welding versus traditional welding. Somewhat, we're fabricators, not manufacturers. Is one thing to think about too, right? Everything is always ever changing, so. We are putting some supply lines in, different things that we can automate that we hadn't really thought about doing before when it becomes repeatable, right? So if we go to a model where we're building the same thing over and over and over, we will design and kind of build out our fabrication facilities to accommodate that. And new technologies in robotics and everything will be a huge part of that.
Yeah, to expand on that a little bit and completely echo even some of the things that we talked about a few minutes ago with the advent of direct liquid cooling and the philosophical approach to moisture or water in the data center, even 5 years ago, completely different than it is now. So our approach in the fabrication process, and especially doing it in the controlled environment, QA/QC and the testing and validation of those systems becomes a really, really important part of the process. So our fabrication facilities are effectively built around that philosophy, if you will, because the reliability and to the point I made earlier with the tolerance for failure being zero, that the prefab process and the automation that goes along with it being integrated with the QA/QC and the management of that process and flow is going to be key for the industry, not just us, it's the entire industry.
Fantastic.
I think, one of the things that we're going to have to continue to innovate on here, because we are getting more remote with these facilities, is just generally transportation. I mean, we are limited right now in prefabrication by exactly what we can deliver and making sure that is both, sustainable and cost efficient, right? So I think that there are certain trends that we have to continue to follow there to figure out how, in the sequence of building a building, we deliver those part components in a more efficient way. I think that's going to be something we have to look forward to as we get more and more rural with some of these sites and that power grid.
Arif, did you have any brief closing thoughts?
I think my biggest thing is, right, I mean, I was just looking at some data, and I was looking at data and said, okay, the total addressable market just in 2023 for data centers in terms of the amount of construction going on was a little over $11 billion. Okay, and it's supposed to grow at an annual rate of about 15%. Okay, so when you start looking at that, right, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand, we're trying to help, to some level kind of skate to where the puck is, right, to be able to start putting these facilities in those areas that are that we have the labor, we have the kind of technical skill set to be able to produce this in a fabrication shop, and then to be able to supply it, right? And that's one of the advantages we have, because the fact of the matter is it's a significant capital investment for this, right? But we've been doing it for decades. So it's a little bit easier to expand in terms of what you already have. So this is a significant capital investment, but we're willing to make that capital investment because we do see that the market demand is going to continue to grow. And not only is the size of the construction, size of the market growing, the percentage of work that's going to be done in fabrication is going to continue to grow. Right? So it makes a lot of sense to be able to do as much of this in those geos where we have those facilities, continue to expand those, and to be able to provide, when you really think about this, this is really high quality, complex fabrication going on. I think people don't understand sometimes in terms of what is involved in this. And to be able to bring technology, like you just heard from these guys, like robotics and technology in terms of laser cutters, in terms of pipe, all these things that we can bring in, capital intensive, but it makes sense to be able to do it because speed is probably the most important thing for our customers.
Very true. And a great note to end on. Steve H, Steve C, Arif, Steve T, thank you so much for joining me. I wish we could have gone on longer, but unfortunately I am going to have to wrap it up there. But thank you so much for joining me. It's been fantastic to have you on Building at Scale North America. Please do reach out to the team, Connect Offline. I'm sure they'd be delighted to hear from you. Please reach out to Legence if you have any questions. And again, thank you so much to Legence for supporting this episode. If you do want any further reading, check out the resources on the page, and do tune in to our next episode coming up in just a couple of minutes. How is the Bring Your Own Power approach developing in North America? But again, to Legence and to Arif, Steve T, Steve H, Steve C, thank you very much for joining me.